Welcome to Hello Therapy, a podcast to help you take charge of your mental health through evidence-based psychological tips and tools straight from the therapy room so that you can live life better. Welcome back to Hello Therapy. I am your host, Dr. Liz White, consultant clinical psychologist with 20 years experience in mental health. Are you wrestling with the guilt of self-care or feeling undeserving of a moment's rest? Does your inner critic pipe up when you start to rest? Well, what if I told you that rest is not a luxury, but a fundamental pillar of sustaining your health and your happiness? Well, in today's episode, I am joined by Suzy Reading. Suzy is a chartered psychologist, a coach, and an author, and she specializes in self-care and recently published her ninth book titled Rest to Reset, The Busy Person's Guide to Pausing with Purpose, which I have linked in the show notes along with all of Suzy's social media handles and info. And in this episode, we talk about some of the key concepts in her book, including going beyond the conventional concept of rest and self-care. We talk about digital burnout and the overwhelming demands of modern life now, and how embracing restorative practices that go beyond the physical aspects are so important. We also discuss the barriers to rest, in particular self-criticism, and how you can adopt micro moments of rest and self-care into your daily routine without feeling selfish. So stick around, because towards the end of the episode, we do a super brief yet highly effective exercise together. And we also discuss using kinder and more compassionate self-talk to enhance self-care practices. So make yourself comfortable and settle into this truly rejuvenating chat, and I do hope you enjoy. So welcome, Suzy. I'm so pleased that you're here. Do you want to start off by sort of saying a bit about who you are and what you do?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you for such a lovely warm welcome, Liz. I am a chartered psychologist. My background is organizational psychology. I'm also a yoga teacher, and I spent a previous decade of my professional life working as a personal trainer. And I love drawing those modalities together to empower people with nourishing skills and practices, therapeutically to help people navigate periods of stress, loss, and change. But from a coaching perspective, it's all about healthy habits. So it spans the spectrum of survival mode to flourishing, which is just the nature of the human experience, right?
Absolutely.
But qualifications aside, and I really mean that, it was becoming a mum at the same time as witnessing my father's decline with motor neurone disease that makes restorative practices and self-care and self-compassion something that's really close to my heart.
And it's often those sorts of experiences, isn't it, that really sort of gives us that opportunity to look at what we're doing and how we're doing things, life in general, but also sort of how we look after ourselves, isn't it?
Absolutely. That was, yeah, I'd say it pressed the fast forward button on my growth journey, that life experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we're here to talk about sort of self-care and self-criticism. But I wanted to first get into this idea of self-care, because it's a term that is sort of banded around, isn't it, on social media and media in general. And I know that you've written quite a few books now, haven't you, on self-care. And I'd be really interested in your sort of how you define it and why you think it's important.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, I want to stick up for the term self-care. It does require disentangling from the clutches of consumerism. Yes, productivity. It also requires clarification in that it's not about shouldering our burden alone. And that's very important to be communicated, that we all need to receive care. Yes. But please, can we not toss out the phrase self-care, because in it, we are reclaiming the right to self, which is fundamental, and we're also reclaiming the right to care for self, which is absolutely essential if we want to function as human beings. Now, in terms of a definition, there are a few different ones that I use, and I think different things resonate for different people. But at its heart, self-care is healthcare, and that's nourishment for the head, the heart, and the body. I think where we tend to be well-versed with what it takes to look after our physical body, but in terms of our emotional health, mental health, we need to broaden the toolkit. But let's be honest, sometimes health is not sufficiently galvanizing, right?
Yeah.
It can be hard to make the healthy choice. So an alternative definition might be thinking along the lines of, it's how we manage our energy. And just like a car needs petrol to go, we need self-care to top us up so that we are well-resourced to cope with the inevitable curveballs of life.
100%. And I think when you are someone who is very self-critical, you're someone that has that sort of narrative in your head being really mean and hostile and telling you that you're not good enough. It's really hard to be self-caring. And I think what can sort of be underneath that is a sense of, I don't deserve care, or I don't deserve to care for myself. And I think what often happens is we sort of default to the, I don't have time. Self-care it takes up too much time. It's a waste of time. And you can end up sort of not seeing the value in it. And those sorts of beliefs can be real blocks, can't they, to being self-caring. And I wanted to talk with you about your new book, Rest to Reset, which I love. And in it, you talk about the myths around rest. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about what you think the myths are around the whole self-care and rest idea.
This book was so pivotal in my understanding of people's relationship with themselves via self-care, via rest, because this Rest Reset, I think, is my 8th book.
Wow.
So I've been talking for about a decade about self-care, right? And when we first started having that conversation, people were nodding in agreement, going, oh, that's interesting. It was fresh. It was new. I mean, sure, the media was saying it's a buzzword, it's a fad. But actually, when you take a look at its roots, this is all about, how we can sustain ourselves so that we can keep giving and keep going. And it was originally used in the context of workers in high-risk roles.
Right.
We're talking crash investigation unit. We're talking nurses, surgeons, right? Yeah. But I think what we've learnt in the last couple of years is that no one is immune from these periods of squeeze, right? We all need it. But so in the last decade, you're right. The default response has been, I don't have time. I don't have energy. I haven't got the disposable income. And I get it. There are some self-care practices that require an investment of all of those things. But for anyone that's been following me, you will see that I offer a plethora of realistic, doable, potent practices that you can do in 30 seconds or 5 minutes, or it's a lens through which we see our day unfolding, right? None of this stuff takes extra time or energy or expense, and still people feel like they're unworthy of it. Yeah. And I think it comes down to, and I think rest was really the thing that made me realize just how phobic we are of being seen as selfish, because people would volunteer that they've spent all day lovingly tending to the needs of others. And yet, even when they give themselves a few minutes to just take a couple of relaxed breaths, there's this sense of, it's not okay for me to do this. That's selfish. How on earth can that be selfish when you've spent 99% of your day outward focused? It's that we've become so, phobic of being seen as tending to self, like self is a dirty word.
Mm. And what you spend quite a bit of time at the beginning of the book talking about the sort of wider societal stuff in terms of sort of some kind of ideas about why are we all feeling so depleted, and sort of why we feel so rest starved. And you talk a lot about did you call it digital burnout or virtual burnout, which I thought was really interesting. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think this is what we learned during the pandemic, right? We were getting an awful lot of sedentary rest where we were sat in front of screens. And I think it would be fair to say that no one came out of that experience feeling terribly well rested. Yeah, so it's that experience really showed me how stimulated we are, how much we're taking in through the senses, and how much we need a variety in our rest. So coming back to that beautiful question you asked me about these myths of rest, rest isn't always sitting in stillness on your own doing nothing. Let's not equate rest with sitting in front of a screen. It can be active as well. It's not always sedentary. It can be some kind of creative expression. And in terms of like how we view rest, it doesn't have to be a reward for delivering everything that's required of us. Let's think of it as the fuel that sustains us so that we can step up and do what's required of us.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of unpicking to be done when it comes to rest.
And one thing that resonated with me, you talk in the book about, you say a lot about the kind of the digital side of things and how we are just constantly bombarded by notifications. And I was reflecting on, I think you mentioned something about email in the book, and I was reflecting on when I was a teenager, how the internet was sort of just starting up. And it wasn't until I got to university that we had email. But to access email, you had to go to the library and get on a computer. It was just completely different. Whereas now, our kids are, it's all on a little screen. And I think we all really underestimate the impact of that on our ability to rest, don't we? I mean, it's always, the kind of sleep hygiene stuff around don't have a screen in your bedroom, etc. But nobody really takes much notice of that, do they?
I think you're so right. I had the same experience, Liz. And it's interesting just reflecting on how much things have changed. And it's not just the volume of communication, it's the volume of information that we now consume. It's how contactable we are. It's those response times. It's the number of decisions that we're faced with. Like, you go into a supermarket and if you want to pick up something like tomato paste, there's not just one or two tomato paste. There's like 20 different things, and that's just one item. So if you think about how much mental processing there is required in addition to all of that sensory stimulation from screens, it's like no wonder we are so frazzled and full up and wired. And more than that, it's that rest and silence and pauses can feel deeply uncomfortable because then we're faced with ourselves.
Yeah. What I hear a lot is from people is I have an inability to relax, right? And I work a lot with people who are sort of perfectionists and sort of anxious, high functioning anxiety individuals. And that is the common denominator. I can't relax. I can't stop. And when I do stop, I collapse. And I think there's this real sense of it. Yeah, if I do pause, what then floods in? And I think that's where the kind of anxious thoughts or negative thoughts or self-critical thoughts, if we're talking about self-criticism, that's when they get really loud. And so I think rest alongside self-care, I think it can become something that is actually feared by people.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I would say the first meditation class I ever went to, honestly, it felt like a violence on my mind and body.
Wow.
Right. And I was an experienced yoga teacher at the time. It's not like I wasn't used to being still, but I wasn't used to being still and quiet. And, it was, the cacophony of memories, sensations, thoughts, feelings, it really was overwhelming. Right. And for people that aren't well versed with this, let's use a little process of titration, like drop by drop. Can we have just a little micro moment of stillness or quiet here, a little micro moment of, some kind of breath work or some kind of physical touch. It doesn't have to be, let's clear the mind. I mean, the mind is designed to think, just as your eyes are designed to see. I think we've got some unhelpful associations with what rest means, what relaxation means, with what healthy thinking is, even healthy emotions. It's not about feeling happy all the time or thinking only constructive thoughts, right? Yeah. So again, there's so much to unravel and so many associations that actually get in the way of us moving from doing mode into being mode.
Yeah, 100%. And one of my favorite quotes in the book, I'm going to read it out, is energetic bankruptcy serves no one. You are worthy of great tenderness and care. Can you explain a bit about what you mean by energetic bankruptcy?
Oh, that's the best way I can describe how I felt in my transition to motherhood.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So when I became a mum, it was when my dad was on life support, and it was like this collision of enormous life events where effectively we were mourning Dad. He survived for 15 months. It was a drawn out chapter, but with no clarity. There was never a diagnosis for him, so no sense of clarity on what was going to happen. And at the same time as becoming a parent and this desire to give every cell and fiber of my being to my little girl, because that's what she deserved. And yet, I learnt bloody hard and fast that my depletion served no one. And I had to become really skilled in taking care of myself in a totally different way, because my needs had vastly changed. And what was available to me was a completely different landscape. Now that I was in that collision of life events, right? So energetic bankruptcy, that was it. I just felt like I'd put my finger in the plug socket, and I was just, everything was fried. And it was a matter of, and again, this is where rest to reset comes from. It's like from that place of depletion, so many of the things that we would normally do require energy. And I didn't have any of that. So I feel very passionate about empowering people with practices that they can do even when there's nothing left in the tank. How can we receive light and life?
And that receiving is interesting, isn't it? Because from a self-compassionate perspective, so I in my work I use compassion-focused therapy, and that is basically, it's helping people develop a part of themselves that can be kind and supportive and encouraging towards themselves. But we talk about like the flows of compassion, and one flow is sort of outward, which people are very good at, looking after others and being empathic and sympathetic and things to other people. But the flow from others to a person who's particularly self-critical, for example, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to receive. And I think rest and self-care practices, that is about receiving care for yourself, isn't it? And I think there can be so many blocks and excuses around that.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are a tremendous number of invisible barriers that we've got to bring to the light, because we've come to associate a good human being with a selfless human being. Yeah. We must be selfless. We must self-sacrifice to be a worthy human being. So how on earth can we receive if that then makes us bad? How can we receive when also, if you look at how we raise children, it's that their worth is dependent on how compliant and convenient they are.
Yeah.
And to that end, we come to learn that having needs and voicing needs and asking for our needs to be met, well, that makes us troublesome. And emotional expression, well, that's inconvenient, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's all tied into this feeling of it's not okay to need, it's not okay to express ourselves. If it's not okay to need, how is it then okay to receive? Like that's even further down the track, right? So we've got to come right back to the source of understanding that our worth is not dependent on how productive or effective we are as human beings. It's inherent in our existence.
Yeah. And I think someone who tends to be self-critical will often go out of their way to care for others and to produce and be successful, and often the sort of living in a world where hustle culture is the norm. It's a recipe for absolute depletion. And that's what I really love about the book, is that I'm not sure you mentioned self-care that much, actually, but you obviously, it's all about rest, and this idea of rest. And I think people can get on board with the idea of rest a lot more than the idea of self-care. So language is so important, isn't it?
I would say that even the word rest is so laden. And there's a part of the book where I just wanted to present alternative phrases because, rest is for the wicked, right? The kind of
rest on your laurels.
And it's FOMO, and I'll sleep when I'm dead. And our kids being sent to bed is like the worst punishment that we can conjure. There are still lots of negative associations with sleep and rest. So even just rephrasing it slightly, and again, I don't really want to play word games. I would love for people to feel thoroughly deserving of rest. Rest is vital in itself. There is deep purpose to rest. This is how we heal. This is how we restore. This is how we replenish. But if the word rest makes you go, oh God, I can't do. Okay, so can we create some wiggle room by calling it replenishment, rejuvenation, sustenance, nourishment? It's not selfish to feed your brain. So why should it be seen as self-indulgent to engage in a restorative practices that fills you up energetically?
Absolutely. And you have a really lovely framework in the book, so that I think you call it the 8 pillars of rest, which I thought were really interesting. Although I noticed my mind doing that thing of like either or, it's this or it's that. And I think in the book you say, no, don't do that. Just, see it more as it's just a framework for you to sort of think about it. And I guess thinking about someone who is a bit self-critical and does everything for everyone else, how might someone like that use those pillars, do you think? If what gets in the way is, I don't have time, and I'm not worthy, or I'm undeserving of rest. How do you see that?
I'd come back to how we define rest. Right? I think just having a working definition can be really helpful. And that's where I wanted to provide just a slightly different take on things. So rather than the normal connotations with rest, I wanted to make sure that rest it's about restoration, right? Yeah. It's about bringing us back to balance. It's recalibration. So my definition is we use rest to reset, to bring ourselves back to a sense of harmony. So to that end, it helps to think about, well, what kind of environments have we been immersed in? How have we used our mind? How have we used our body? What would help us bring us back to a feeling of peace? And for people that are feeling resistant to that, it's like, well, what benefit is it when we're depleted or conflicted or frazzled? How can we be of service to anyone? What's the point of that? So it's remembering that this is how we resource ourselves. But that in itself is really difficult. Like, where do we start? And I can remember, you know, in those, the hazy of those early months with my firstborn, thinking, I'm a psychologist with like a decade of professional experience. I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a personal trainer. Look at the toolkit I've got for head, heart, and body management, right? And even then I was kind of like, I'm all out. I don't know what to do, right? Because I needed someone to say, sweetie, try this. Okay, maybe you can't do the yoga practice, or that yoga practice that you used to do doesn't serve you right now, but lie down on your mat and have a sleep. Right? Yeah. I needed the dispensation. So that is the voice, that kind voice, that coaxing voice. I wanted it to speak to people through these 8 pillars of rest, which will help people identify what kind of nourishing action will bring them back to a feeling of peacefulness. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And can you give us some examples of the pillars?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, yeah, and this is available. There's a free download of the 8 pillars of rest on my Instagram bio, because I want everyone to have access to this. This is your roadmap back to a feeling of peace and tenderness. And we're all deserving of that, even if you don't believe it. And here's the thing, don't wait till you feel deserving, do it. And from that tender action, a feeling of worth comes. Okay, let's plant that seed. But let's have a look at these 8 pillars. Yeah. If I can just briefly mention them, we've got movement, and we've got stillness. So that's taking a look at how we've used our body. And like you said, it's not like movement is better than stillness. It's just, what do we need? What have we been doing? Yeah. And then we have stimulation or a break from stimulation. And in there, it might be, maybe there has been a lot of stimulation in your day. You don't necessarily want an absence of stimulation. Maybe you just need stimulation of your choosing. Or actually, maybe we do need a bit of silence. There's always room for silence as well. And then the next one is sort of looking at energy. And I think, again, this is where we sort of unpick our associations with rest. Sometimes we do need more energy. And actually, other times we need a dissipation of energy. If we're feeling really that zingy, kind of anxious energy, it's not always, we need to let go of some. Yeah. And for anyone that wants some practices that will help them relax, we can definitely check in on that. We can actually do a physical practice together, but just making a little mental note of that. Okay. And then we've got taking a look at how we've socialized. Do we need a bit of solitude, or actually we like some connection? And maybe the connection takes different shapes. It doesn't always have to be in person. It could be sending a postcard. It could be sitting next to someone on the sofa and holding their hand. It could be sitting with a cat on your lap. Lots of different shapes. And then we've got how we've used our mind. Do we need more of a sense of a mindful focus? Or if we've been doing lots of problem solving, maybe actually we want just a free wandering mind, a bit of a brain fade, you know, take in Ted Lasso. Great.
I love that term, brain fade.
Yeah.
Just really, that's one of the things that I took away from you about, I need to have a brain fade moment.
It's underrated, isn't it?
Really underrated.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And then the last 3 pillars, the next one is looking at emotional health. And I think this is a really interesting one. Sometimes we need the opportunity to bear witness to our feelings. And then in other moments, you know, I think this is particularly relevant with our grief journey. It's absolutely okay to say, I've sat with you all day, grief. I need a break. It's okay to take a break from our feelings. We're not saying, I can't feel it, I mustn't feel it, I shouldn't. We're not denying it. We're just saying, I just need a little levity. I need, that is okay. That's part of emotional health. That's part of rest.
Absolutely. And grief is, it's one of those things, isn't it, that can just feels so heavy that you literally carry around with you. And of course you need respite from that. And I think the more modern grief theories or models sort of talk about that oscillation between being able to really do the grief work, i.e. feel the grief feelings, and then a bit more sort of restorative stuff and not feeling it. Really important.
And it's also acknowledging the fact that we're still embedded in a life that requires us to do things.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do, it's this dance of, yes, I want to bear witness, but actually I've got to give a corporate talk in 10 minutes. And what is it that I can do that will help me prepare for what's required of me in a compassionate, loving way?
Mm-hmm.
So that's an essential part of our toolkit. And then the last two pillars, and I think this we're sort of starting to get to the self-critical bit here.
Mm-hmm.
We've got comfort and ease, or we've got a stretchy challenge. And I think that's interesting because quite often we think of rest as, oh, let it just be, easy, right? But actually, if your day has involved a lot of monotony, a little bit of a stretchy mental challenge can feel really invigorating. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that brings you back to balance. But then it's the last pillar. This is really important for people that are critical or really tough on themselves or white-knuckling, holding on to that feeling of I must be selfless. Here's the pillar for you. We need to bring into balance giving and receiving. Mm-hmm. This is a fundamental human need.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not selfish to have needs. It's human. So can we allow a little inward focus as well as external focus? Can we allow ourselves to receive care from others as well as ourselves?
And I think you mentioned before about that idea of like micro moments of rest or self-care. And I just really like that idea. And I talk about that in my work in terms of if I have someone that could really benefit from mindfulness or meditation, we always start with, okay, let's just start with a really mundane activity like cleaning your teeth and just do that mindfully rather than, okay, sit down for 10 minutes and listen to this app because it's just not going to work. So those, do you call it micro moments in the book? Do you call it something else? Yeah.
Micro moments. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just, it's just such a lovely, sort of, as you say, like a way in to, giving yourself permission to rest.
Mm-hmm. Should we do one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So let's come back to that notion of I can't relax. I don't know how to relax.
Okay.
All right. So the notion is you've got to relax in stillness. It's about letting go, right? So just let's do a little experiment. I encourage everyone listening, just relax your shoulders, relax your neck, relax your jaw, soften, just cultivate a feeling of release. And I'm hoping we can release some, but don't worry if we're still sort of feeling like we're walking around with our shoulders up around our ears, like our neck is holding us up. Don't worry, okay? Because we're going to do something that will be far more effective than trying to relax in stillness, okay? Try this with me now. This is a little micro moment called the shrug and sigh. So let's make a gentle fist. Yeah. Squeeze your hands. Now, with that squeeze of the hands, you'll also feel your biceps. Now, amplify that. Let your biceps get involved. Okay, now let your chest get involved. And now, can you squeeze your shoulders up to your ears? And if you're game and it's appropriate, can you squeeze all the muscles of your face? Squeeze your face. Take a deep breath in. And as you exhale, let it all go with a sigh. Let yourself flop and drop. Can we do that twice more? Because a little repetition is effective here. Now squeeze, take a deep breath in. And sigh. Let it all go. One last time. Squeeze, shrug your shoulders up your ears, squeeze the muscles of your face, and exhale with a sigh. Let it all go. Flop and drop. Notice how much easier it is to relax using a little bit of movement or a little bit of gentle exertion as the gateway to relaxation. This is why running can be such an effective means of accessing a state of relaxation. Yeah, so we're turning it on its head. It doesn't have to be just lying there in stillness doing nothing. Yeah, little bit of movement, little bit of touch, the breath. These are all potent micro moments that have a really amazing cumulative effect, don't they, Liz?
Absolutely. And there was one exercise in the book that I love and I'm going to steal for my
Please.
work and my clients.
It's
which
not
is
stealing,
that,
it's freely given.
what's it called? It's called breathe with your hands. So
Yes.
a lot of people get quite anxious when they are doing breathing exercises because it makes sense, right? You're focusing on your breath, you're focusing on the inhale and the exhale, and that can really create a lot of anxiety, which is really normal for lots of people. But breathe with your hands, you're focusing on your fists sort of going in and out, and you're focusing on that rather than the actual breath. So I thought that was amazing. It's great.
I'm so pleased. Shout it from the rooftops. And do you know what? The shrug and sigh is a breathing practice.
Yeah.
I'm so pleased that you've said that, because the first instinct is, when people are stressed out of their heads, they're told, oh, just take a deep breath. And it can amplify the anxiety. And then they feel like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? You're not doing anything wrong. It's just that we want to use the breath because it's profoundly soothing for the nervous system, but we don't want to focus on the breath. So the way in is pairing movement with breath or touch. And I'm so pleased, because the one that I love everyone to do is like the chicken wing shoulder roll. So if you put your fingertips on your shoulders, breathe in, lift your elbows up, breathe out, take your elbows back and down. But granted, you can't do that in the middle of a meeting. You can't do that, necessarily in the post office queue, but you can do breathe in, open your hands fully, stretch the skin of your palms, notice a little pause, breathe out, make a gentle fist.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is, I don't know how this works, but Liz, if you do it with me now, if you breathe in and open your hands, can you feel the impact it has on your rib cage? And then when you breathe out and close your fist, can you feel the diaphragm ignites to more completely empty your lungs?
Yeah.
So it's not just that you're not focusing on the breath, you're using a different anchor.
Yeah.
It's that the physical movement of your body facilitates a more expansive, spacious breath. So that's why the mountain breath is so powerful. That's why the chicken wing works. That's why this one works. And I think when we understand why these things work, we're more likely to try it out. And hopefully we can actually feel these benefits.
What is your, because in the book, there's so many practices, tools and there's like an index for different situations. What's your favorite one out of all of them in the book?
Okay. Well, I think we need to bring it right back to self-criticism. Okay. Now, here's a challenge. I find it nigh on impossible to trash talk myself while I'm doing this ritual.
Okay.
All right. I hope everyone's curious. Now, if we can rub the hands together to create a little bit of warmth, and then if we can tenderly cradle, chin in hands, let the fingertips curl round to the temples, and just notice how nice it feels to be held. Reminding ourselves that we can be our own calm, safe place, and that we are indeed worthy of that tenderness. And then release, and we can re-enter our day and allow that feeling of tenderness to lead us.
And that's lovely, isn't it? That soothing touch. But there's something about like touching your face, right? That's really powerful. Because I think, I don't know, growing up, you might have had a parent that was like, it'll be okay, and it's, that's lovely. And you're right. It's therefore very difficult to sort of access that self-critical part when you are being tender and gentle with yourself.
Yeah. And if we can couple it with, here's another little hack. And I think these hacks can be so, like, let's have fun with it. Clearly it's not the answer to everything, and I'm not saying that. But for anyone that finds it hard to cultivate these kind words, now there's some interesting research that shows that when we refer to ourselves as you or I, it naturally cultivates more punitive, critical self-talk. Right. However, when we refer to ourselves with a pet name, like sweetie, darling, cookie, like really go to town with it, have fun with it, it naturally helps us speak to ourselves with greater dignity and respect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with all of the gestures, all of the breathing practices, the movement rituals, the touch, pair it with some kind of pet name and some kind of kind coaxing in a dialogue. Even if it's just, sweetie, this is really hard. And of course you find it hard. It's just acknowledging where we're at. But the sweetie, it can make all the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we hit record on this podcast, I was in a bit of a flat because I had various things going wrong this morning. And you came on and you were like, sweetie, it's okay. And it was like, I get that word, sweetie. It's like, I've never met you before in real life. And it was just, okay, yeah, I could feel the softening in my shoulders. So that was lovely. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so pleased.
So let's wrap up that then in terms of let's think about that, any listeners who are, who see themselves as self-critical or experience that self-criticism. What would be the sort of maybe 3 like take-home things that you would want someone like that to know, given our conversation today? What would be most helpful, do you think?
Okay. I think beneath self-criticism and perfectionism and people-pleasing and hyper-independence, all of these things, whatever it is that you sort of notice your tendency, let's acknowledge that first and foremost, there is some malleability. We can create change.
Mm-hmm.
But I think let's dig deeper. What lies underneath that tendency? Because underneath that tendency might be something that's really beautiful, that needs to be celebrated and protected and not removed. Okay, because I think sometimes that's why we hold fast to these things, because I don't want to give that up. That's really important to me as a human being. So please, can we dig deeper beneath the behavior that we're identifying that might be getting in our way? What lies underneath that? Is it a desire to excel? Is it a desire to be generous and loving and kind and present? And please, let's hold these beautiful values up to the light and be proud of ourselves for our commitment to them. And then the last step is, how can we allow our commitment to that value take a different shape, and a shape that actually broadens that value to include ourselves as well? So it's even more complete. It's even more beautiful.
Yeah, lovely. I mean, I've had such a nice chat with you today, Suzy. Thank you so much again. Will you come back at some point and we can get into other things?
I'd love to, Liz. I think we've just touched upon some things that need some serious, not just unpicking, but excavation. And I have to admit, I'm just on my own trajectory of understanding why we feel as we do, looking at the cultural conditioning that we've all been immersed in. So hell yes. And I've loved our conversation today. Thank you. It's so affirming. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Hello Therapy. If you found it helpful, don't forget to subscribe, follow and review. You can get more well-being and mental health tips by joining our email list and visiting the resources section of our website at harleyclinical.co.uk. The Hello Therapy podcast and the information provided by me, Dr. Liz White, is solely intended for information and educational purposes and does not constitute personalised advice. Please do reach out to your GP or a mental health professional if you need support. Until next time, take care of yourself.